and Ronald Reagan comes in number 1. What do I do with people, man? He got 19%. Lincoln came in number 2 behind the Kipper, and then, the list continued. Bill Clinton came in number 3 with 13%. Look, Bill Clinton is not the 3rd best president we've ever had. Not even close. How about George frickin' Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? The guy does the Louisiana Purchase, buys a third of the country from the French for a nickel and a dime. And the guy wrote the Declaration of Independence. I know that wasn't when he was president. Louisiana Purchase, when he was president. Okay? How about James Madison? How about FDR, who saves us from the Depression and World War II? How about Truman with the Marshall Plan?
Ronald Reagan. No, I haven't lost my mind. This is President's Week. According to this new Gallup poll this week, 19% of respondents chose Reagan as our nation's number 1 chief executive. The former B-movie star even beat out Abraham Lincoln, the guy who freed the slaves and saved our union during America's darkest days.
I think Ronald Reagan would be unelectable today, even as a Democrat. Now let's review the record. Reagan gave amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants. Instantly, he's eliminated. That's far too liberal a position for a so-called mainstream Democrat today. It wasn't pathway to citizenship. It was blanket amnesty. I'm not sure there's an elected Democrat in the country right now that argues for that liberal a position. As Reagan once said, facts are stubborn things. Second, he negotiated with terrorists and traded arms for hostages. Another instant elimination. Imagine what Fox News would do to a Democratic president who flat out made a deal with terrorists and gave them arms. Game over. Unelectable. Facts are stubborn things. Ronald Reagan, after initially cutting taxes, raised taxes 11 different times. He saw that the deficit was going to be even more out of control and changed course on tax rates. If Obama raised taxes 11 different times on his watch, that's all anyone would talk about. He wouldn't dare, and you know it. Even after Reagan cut taxes in 1981, and everyone gave him credit for being so conservative, the top marginal tax rate at the time was 50%. That's 15 points higher than now. If Obama suggested we had a top marginal rate of 50%, he would be pummeled. Facts are stubborn things. Finally, what happened when we were attacked by terrorists in the Middle East under Reagan's watch? He ran for the hills. We lost 241 U.S. servicemen in Lebanon after a massive terrorist strike by Hezbollah on our Marines. What was Reagan's response? Cut and run. If a Democrat had done that, it is inconceivable that he could get elected in this day and age. He'd be called a coward, an appeaser, scared of terrorists, etc.
Razor to his resume. What's next? The Tea Party today has vaulted Ronald Reagan up to be an American demigod. And what's their main party platform? The national debt. So let's see how Ronald Reagan addressed our nation's debt. When Reagan moved into the White House in 1980, and he inherited a $930 billion national debt. When he left office in 88, our national debt was nearly $3 trillion. Let me repeat that. He inherited a debt of under $1 trillion and turned it into a debt of nearly $3 trillion. He added 3 times more debt to the country than all of the presidents of the 21st century combined. He borrowed more money than every president from George Washington to Jimmy Carter combined. And anybody who wants to tell you how the economy improved and things got better after Reagan's union busting and tax cuts for the rich, here's a simple reply. You give me a credit card with $2 trillion on it that my grandchildren will have to pay off, but I don't spend much of anything on, and let me spend that money around on lavish and idiotic projects like Star Wars, and I'll show you what it looks like to live large. Republicans attack Obama for borrow and spend stimulus. Reagan was the ultimate borrower and spender, the largest in the history of the United States of America until George W. Bush came along and borrowed and spent nearly twice as much in the process of resurrecting Reaganomics. So let's add that to Reagan's resume, America's greatest debtor and squanderer of our wealth. Let's see, who is America's so-called greatest enemy today? Did you say Osama bin Laden? Well, Ronald Reagan helped create him. In order to fight a proxy war against the Soviet Union, Reagan spent billions of dollars training and arming Islamic fundamentalists in the mountains of Afghanistan. Once the Soviets left the country, Reagan allowed those same Islamic fundamentalists to take control of the Afghan parliament, giving the Taliban and Osama bin Laden power that they would one day use to attack America. So let's add terrorist enabler to his resume. Oh, and for those of you who said that America's greatest enemy has not bin Laden, but instead Iran, guess what? He illegally gave weapons to Iran, too. Just look at the Iran-Contra affair. So let's add illegal arms dealer to his resume. Then in 1982, Ronald Reagan signed a bill that gave amnesty. That's right, amnesty. The whole thing, the whole enchilada, amnesty to 3 million illegal immigrants in the United States. I think every Republican in the state of Arizona's head just exploded as I said that. But it's true. So if you want to blame anyone for the huge number of illegal immigrants who thought, hey, more opportunity by coming to this country, just look to Ronald Reagan, America's greatest president. So let's add illegal immigrant coyote to his resume, too. Now, what do we get? Well, let's see. Habitual tax raiser. Added nearly $3 million to the national debt. Terrorist enabler. President who helped our enemies. A president who illegally smuggled weapons to a hostile government in Iran. And a president who exploded our nation's immigration problem. Why is he the greatest president, then? Played the role of the useful idiot by dropping the top marginal tax rate below 50%, by reducing corporate taxes, by changing our trade laws, and changing the rules governing CEO compensation. Perhaps most importantly, Reagan effectively stopped enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act, transforming America's cities and shopping malls from havens for small family-owned businesses to a nationwide homogenous array of outlets owned by a small handful of corporations.
One is invoking Ronald Reagan.
I worked with President Reagan.
My first vote for president was in 1980 for Ronald Reagan. I watched Reagan. I watched every speech that was on TV. I watched every press conference. And I just studied him, and I read every book that's ever been written about Reagan, and I just find the man fascinating.
What concerted effort by billionaires and their wholly owned top GOP operatives to rewrite history and elevate Ronald Reagan's presidency. And sadly, it's working. Our nation's history of great presidents, from George Washington to Thomas Jefferson to Abraham Lincoln to Franklin Delano Roosevelt to John F. Kennedy, all of them overshadowed by one man who tragically began the destruction of America's middle class and dismantled America's greatness, Ronald Reagan. It's time we let the man's resume speak for itself. Reagan wasn't the greatest gift to America. He was just the greatest gift to America's billionaires.